You know what, Mr. Rhino? I think I'm going to move you back a couple of weeks in the schedule. I want to paint me a mini. A Salamander mini. I'd seen so many of these Horus Heresy Mark VI Space Marines being built on YouTube that, well, it kind of hooked me, and I decided I wanted to take a break from vehicles and build a Space Marine myself. I decided on this fancy looking sergeant with the great bird feather crest on the top of his helmet. I decided to paint the model in a few sub-assemblies just to make things a little easier. Because the figure was in an open position, it would be much easier to paint all of the details there. I added some Vallejo brown earth basing texture to the base, just to give it a little bit of a bumpy appearance. And then I primed everything with Vallejo black spray primer. Now I've seen many painters that are doing their Space Marines from the Horus Heresy era in a more desaturated look. And I wanted to follow this pattern, but at the same time I had to be careful not to go too dark, or it might start looking more like a Dark Angel than a Salamander. I started by applying a base coat of WAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAA opaque coverage, but rather just put it down and let it dry so that it would go on very thin and very smooth, and then I could just continue building up the layers to get a nice dark green look to the whole model. I painted the undersuit using Eshin Gray. The next color I applied was a very, very thin glaze of Warpstone Glow. I thinned the paint down about 50-50 with water, and then I just began to apply it on in a very thin coat. I would dip my brush into the paint and then unload most of the color onto a paper towel. And then when I put it on the model, you can see that it's just going on in a very thin coat. The idea was not to give it a fully opaque coat of Warpstone Glow, which would be a much brighter green than I was looking for, but rather to build up layers of the Warpstone Glow over the WAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAA than what you typically see on a 40K Salamander. This is a process that I can't really say, there's a right number of coats to do. It's one of those I know it when I get there kind of things. Here you can see the very subtle difference between one coat of the Warpstone Glow glaze and the WAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAAA coat of Warpstone Glow all over the model, I began to add additional glaze coats, but only in the areas that would receive more light. I wanted to brighten these up a little bit. I still wasn't trying to bring it up to full opacity for the Warpstone Glow, but rather just to indicate some shape and volume on the areas that were more prominent and exposed to light sources from above. Now, there's some areas on the Space Marine that I want to be black, so I'm going to use Vallejo's Black Gray for this. But also, in some of the other areas that aren't going to be black, I'm going to overpaint those areas with this Black Gray to kind of reset it to a darker undercoat, and then I can put other colors on top of that. All of the metallic parts got a base coat of Citadel's Leadbelcher. Even if an area is going to receive a different metallic color down the road, I go ahead and cover it with Leadbelcher. It makes a great undercoating for any other metallics. The holsters on these models are beautifully detailed little sculpts. I gave it a coat of Rhinox Hide to start the leather basing. I also gave the belt a base coat of Rhinox Hide. I'd seen a method that Darren Latham had shown on Instagram to paint flames on the shoulder armor. I thought it looked really good, so I wanted to try and emulate that. I started by glazing on several coats of Khorne Red just to give it a faint reddish glow. Next, I began to paint on flames using the colors shown here on screen in that order. I traced the initial shape with Khorne Red and then just moved through the colors in a gradient until I got to the very brightest and lightest yellow. Each of the paints was thinned about 50-50 with water. It helps to have all of the paints on your palette so that you can make adjustments as you go along. I had to make a few adjustments as I went. Once I was done, I was pretty happy with it. It wasn't quite what I had envisioned in my mind, but it wasn't near as bad as I had feared it would be. I painted the wrappings on the sword handle using Screamer Pink. Using Balthazar Gold, I painted the business end of his gun and also the skull on the sword's handle. The rooster feathers on his head got a coat of Khorne Red. Hey, I made a rhyme. I used some Nocturne Green to glaze in some deeper shadows, and this would just help bring out the volumes on the armor. Now I'm ready to add some shades to the model. For his rooster comb, I'm going to add some Carroburg Crimson. Around the silver details, I'm going to use some Nuln Oil. I'm also going to use the Nuln Oil on the joint areas of the armor where they had previously been painted Eshin Gray. The bronzy, brassy areas get some Seraphim Sepia. I also used a very heavy coat of the Seraphim Sepia for the gun holster. Finally, I used Athonian Camo shade on all the green parts. In a lot of places, I'll hold the model upside down. That way it makes sure that the shade flows exactly where I want it to. I also switched to a 2-0 liner brush to make sure that I was very precise in my application. The next step is going to be edge highlighting, and this is easily going to be the part of the process that takes the longest. But this is also the part that can be the most rewarding in terms of how the final result is. So I just take my time and use a small pointed brush, thin my paint down about 50-50 with water, and just very carefully work along the edges. In some places I can use the edge of my brush to do the edge highlighting, and in others I have to do the tip. But I work very slowly, and I just make sure that I try to be as precise as possible. If I do mess up, I can just go back with the base color and touch those up later. I dry brushed the holster using Doombull Brown. I also did an initial edge highlight of the belt using the same color. I used Tuskgor Fur for the lightest highlights on both the holster and the belt. The silver areas were highlighted with some Runefang Steel. I highlighted the bronze areas with Canoptek Alloy, or Canoptek Alloy, or however you say that. To paint the plasma coils, I started off by basing them with gray Seer. Next, I gave it a coat of Kantor Blue. Next, I used Teclis Blue, and I tried to concentrate on the raised area of the coils and leave a little bit of the Kantor Blue showing along the bottom. The next color was Baharroth Blue, again focused on the raised coils, but a little further up than before. And finally, some white scar adds the hottest points along the top of the coil. Finally, I finished it off with a glaze of fluorescent blue from AK Interactive. I want to give the sword a fiery, glowy effect. To start off, I'm going to cover it in a base of gray Seer just so I have a nice light base to start from. Now I'll cover the whole sword in Flash Gitz Yellow. This will probably take 2 or 3 coats. Next, I glazed on some Trollslayer Orange. I wanted that power node to remain yellow, so I wanted to glaze away from that and build up the color towards mainly towards the pointy tip of the blade. I'll continue the glazing process, moving on to Mephiston Red. The next glaze will be with Khorne Red. Next is Rhinox Hide. This is a little less than a glaze. It's very thin down though. Next I'll paint the power node and the raised edges along the length of the blade using Yriel Yellow. Now to amp up the colors just a little bit more, I'm going to glaze on some Bad Moon Yellow. I've just thinned this with a little bit of water. And finally, just a little bit of pure white will hopefully sell the effect of heat. Well, I think that's a pretty credible rendition of a middle-aged man playing with a bunch of paints. I dry brushed his rooster feathers with some Evil Sunz Scarlet. And then I went right along the top edge with some Wild Rider Red. I fully painted the eyes in Khorne Red, and then about 2/3 of it in Evil Sunz Scarlet, and then about 1/3 of it in Trollslayer Orange. Finally, a single dot of white to give a reflection point. Okay, maybe 2. We'll call it done. Now I'll paint the base in Doombull Brown. Then I'll give it a shade of Seraphim Sepia. I'll give it a dry brush of Tuskgor Fur. And I'll also get a little bit up on his feet and lower legs. And I wrapped everything up by painting the edge of the base with Nocturne Green. Well, I think I'm ready to call this guy done. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. It's certainly not flawless. There's plenty on it that could be improved. However, that's part of the process, really. I've always built vehicles. For many years, I've built traditional models, aircraft, and things like that. And while there's a lot of overlap in the skills used on the different genres, I'm finding out more and more as I go along in my journey through tabletop gaming, especially through Warhammer, that the specific skills required to do this type of work are very different from what I did with aircraft and even what I do even today with Warhammer 40K vehicles and things like that. So this is a good exercise, a good stretching of what I know, and it's been really helpful in understanding how to do this. If I zoom in, you can see that, you know, the blends could be better and there could be more contrast between the light and the dark. The shoulder pauldron didn't turn out bad, but I think I went a little too heavy with the yellow and not enough with the other colors. There's a lot that is certainly I learned from this, and that's a good process. And whether you're a seasoned miniature painter or you're just coming into it, the skills that you bring in are important, and the skills external to what you're doing are important. So, you know, don't neglect those. Many of the skills that I had from military modeling have translated very well into this type of thing and have been helpful. and at the same time, developing new things has been fun and beneficial and helps me in all areas of my modeling. And I'm certainly not doing this in a vacuum. I spend a lot of time watching miniature painters on YouTube because it fascinates me, the process. It is a challenge for me, I'll admit. My hands have some shake, especially later in the day, that I think is just coming from age. And then I've had cataract surgery, and so I don't have my original lenses in my eyes. So my vision up close is not very good, and I have difficulty painting things that are very tiny, but I like doing it, and it's a lot of fun. But to just shout out the folks that I tend to watch the most, that help me in so many ways. Certainly Mark Sarastro from Sarastro's Painting and Duncan Rhodes. I have to mention them first because I've watched them the longest, and they've really inspired me in starting to say, I want to paint minis. I don't know that I'll ever be called a miniature painter, probably not, but I want to paint them. I have fun with them. But there's other channels like Brushstroke Painting, Infernal Brush, Juan Hidalgo, Richard Gray, Sonic Sledgehammer, Tabletop Ready, The Painting Coach. And there's plenty of others, but all of those are ones that I watch almost on a daily basis because they're just so beneficial and encouraging to me, and that's a big thing. If you're wanting to learn a new area of painting, of the hobby, certainly look for people who do good work, but look for people who are encouraging. That's really important. Entertainment is fun. It has its place. It's nice. But, what's really helpful to me in learning to paint minis is watching people paint minis. And the same way with painting vehicles or painting aircraft or cars or tanks or anything. So those folks have been really helpful to me, and I just want to give them a shout out and thank them for their body of work and what an encouragement they have been to me. And I'd also like to thank the patrons who support the work that I do on Patreon. I am so very grateful for your support. It is a blessing to me. It's a blessing to my family. It allows me to do this that I do and in a way that I would not be able to do otherwise, through getting the paints and the supplies and the kits and things like that. So thank you to all the patrons who sacrifice a little bit each month that I can do this and bring it to everybody. So it's not lost on me that that's a commitment, and it means something to me, and I am grateful for it. And finally, I'll leave you with one final thought, as I always like to do. In this hobby, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Happy day to you, friends. Bye-bye.